Hello and welcome to a series I'd like to call The Professional Insider, a weekly podcast series where I talk to people in particular and perhaps peculiar professions, getting a glimpse into their work and into their lives. I'm your host, Helen Tesjanla. Today's profession concerns zoology, a field of biology that studies the animal kingdom and their ecosystems.
The specialization that I'm in has to do with large mammals, other vertebrates, tropical ecology, and more importantly, the conservation.
Right.
And so while I'm a zoologist, most of my work is dealing with conservation issues in the Amazon.
That's Richard Bodmer, Professor in Conservation Ecology at the University of Kent. Is that why you're in Peru right now? Are you doing some work there, or is it for other reasons?
Yeah, I'm here because I spend most of my time here in the Peruvian Amazon. I'm in Iquitos, which is in the western Amazon basin, because this is where I do the long-term research, conservation programs. We have a lot of, pre-pandemic, we've had a lot of students, and we run student field courses throughout the year in normal years. Working with different institutions such as Operation Wallacea, Earthwatch, among others.
Mm-hmm. So, Richard, is conservation within the Amazon a big topic in zoology?
Conservation is a strategy for the long-term survival of the ecosystems, animals, and local people. So related to that, you have things such as community-based conservation, climate change impacts, sustainability of hunting, habitat destruction or conservation. And so you kind of have this web of different aspects, where zoology for us is a central point in understanding those different aspects. Let me take our climate change research, for example. The Amazon has gone through some very strong intensifications of flooding. So flooding has become much greater in Western Amazonia over the years, in recent years. What we do is we then look at the animal populations, the biology of the animals, to see how those are impacted by those more intensive floods. We've seen population crashes of some animals, and we've seen increases in other animals, such as aquatic, the dolphins, and the fish, and the giant otters. And so by looking at the animals, we can understand how this climate change is impacting that part of the ecosystem. And then we can understand better how that is impacting the local people, the people who depend on the fish, depend on the bushmeat. How is that impacting their food security? How is that impacting their conservation programs which they're implementing?
Do you get a lot of government support or funding, or does it come from a third party?
Yeah, our major base of support is students. Because we run student field courses throughout the year, the students pay tuition, so we run very much like a small university.
I see.
Where students pay the tuition to come out and participate in the research and get the experience and the learning, capacity building. And it's that tuition funding that then helps us maintain the research programs. And at the same time, the students involved with collecting the data. Mm-hmm. And so we also have the information coming in from the help of the students, and then they are able to do the thesis or research projects and so forth from that. I mean, we're basically closed down right now. We've had no students. The last students came out in February. Everything else has been canceled, and to build it back up again is going to take some time. And so, yeah, we've been hit very hard by this in terms of what we can do out with the research right now. Everything's kind of been put on hold until the students start coming back again. We usually have about 500 students a year coming through our programs, and so it's a significant number of students. That's gone down to zero. So we're just kind of frozen in limbo right now, waiting for the world to change.
And do you think that by keeping an eye on the situation, then you can judge, or people can judge when it's safe enough for those programs to get back on track?
First of all, I mean, Peru's closed for international travel. So we're not going to get any students until Peru opens up again for international travel. We have some Peruvian students, but they're also in lockdown. Our expectations are that we're going to continue to be closed down. Our current model is that we won't have anything, absolutely zero, probably until March 2021 at the earliest. And then after that, it's going to build up quite slowly. It's not going to just come back to normal at all. We're looking at several years of recovery. So we've had about a 75% reduction in staff. We are maintaining a very basic data collection on some of the species out there. There's a small number of staff that we do have, so we can continue something at least. And so our main financial model is, can we survive until things come back? And that means cutting costs wherever we can. A programmatic research model is, okay, what can we do without actually incurring many costs? So right now, the main thing we have out there are called camera traps, where you have these cameras put out in the forest, in the rainforest, and then when an animal walks in front of it, it takes a photograph or a short video of that animal. That's one of the methods we can use because it doesn't involve much human effort. And so we don't have the expenses of having people out there every day collecting data, and we have to supply the food and the logistics and all that. The camera traps we put out in the forest, and every 3 months we can go and pick them up and change their batteries and download their cards and put them back again. And so what we're looking at is kind of more of this remote input of data without impacting the finances.
Is the research ever finished, or is it a constant evolving and moving picture to see what the environment's like and to study the animals and so on?
As you answer some questions, of course, so the data gets collected, and the data then becomes analyzed, and then that gets published, and then that answers a set of questions, and then that, of course, produces more questions, and so you go through another cycle then of trying to answer those new questions that have come up. For example, we were looking at the impact of these floods on the ground living animals, and we saw that there was a tremendous impact because if things are flooded, of course, that means you're going to have a lot of mortality or death in those animals, and we saw that. And some of the populations, such as the deer and the brocket deer and the peccaries, which are like a wild pig, and some of the large rodents, such as the paca and the guti, those decreased almost by 95% during these very intensive floods that have happened recently.
Wow.
Well, then that led to other questions. Okay, how long does it take for them to recover? And so we looked at then the questions of, okay, are they recovering? How fast are they recovering? Are these floods happening again? And then looking at the recovery, that was kind of more exciting. How fast did some of these animals recovering? And then also looking at them in the non-flooded forest, which they weren't impacted. Of course, that was something important also. Well, they didn't die everywhere. They died in the flooded forest, about 1/3 of the landmass. And then we work with our colleagues down in Brazil and Bolivia, which have a completely different situation in the Amazon and the Pantanal, where everything's burning. And so they're having equally strong mortality of these same animals, but not because of flooding, because of the fires, and then be killed by the fires. Mm-hmm. And so you have flooding on one side and the burning on the other side of the Amazon. And so, this is something which, isn't particularly nice to see all of this going on. And it's all related to the climate change. In the southern Amazon, you have greater drying. And that drying, again, makes fires more prominent, either naturally caused or human-caused fires. This is not a good situation what we're seeing. And then on top of that, now you have the pandemic. The whole thing is, this isn't a terribly optimistic time for this world right now.
Definitely not.
In terms of our research, but the data itself is the data we want to show and we want to produce because we feel that the reality is what we're about.
Mm-hmm. Are there many misconceptions about the work there?
Yeah, I mean, because our field courses go through that whole process, a lot, you do see students, some of them coming in as very much protectionists, right? Oh, we have to save the Amazon and the people are the problem, right? I think by the time they leave our field courses, they see a very different reality, that the people are the solution, and the community-based indigenous territories, the community-based protected areas, or the co-managed community-based national parks and reserves are the future here. Here in Loreto, for example, which is a large area, larger than the UK, it's all Amazonian, you have now over 50% of the land mass under community-based conservation. Half of it. When I started working here, there was basically none. And myself and a small team of people worked with some local communities and were able to create the first community reserve in this part of the Amazon. And that has now expanded to half of the Amazon region here. And so that's very much part of what we've always done and continue to do. And I think once the students go through and see that, they start understanding that yes, the local communities are really key for the future of the Amazon.
How did you become involved with this work? Was it something that you were passionate about from when you were very young, or was it something that you kind of went on in a whim with your studies and your degree at Cambridge?
No, it began much earlier than that. It began when I was at school and I did some science projects on deer, and then went on to work at a zoo when I was quite young. I started working at the zoo when I was 16 and continued to work at the zoo while I went to university. And at university I studied biology and then went on to do the PhD. I did my master's in Africa, for example, in the Congo, and then went on to my PhD, which I did here in the Amazon, and then went on to work for Brazilian Research Institute, and then the University of Florida, and then the University of Kent, and then developed the research program, the field course program here in Peru. So yeah, I started this, I would say, at a very early age, long before university.
Have you come across within your work or when you were teaching any point of resistance from people, from organisations, perhaps saying, you're wasting money on this, it's not worth it?
Yes, I have a good example of that.
Please tell me.
Back in the late 80s, early 90s, as you know, Peru was in a problem with the Sendero Luminoso, the terrorism activities in the Amazons. It was in that period that we were starting the community-based conservation with the local people. And so the government authorities sat me down and said, look, don't do this community-based conservation. It's not good. Because, of course, what they were afraid of is the communities would have more power and control during that period, you know, and that's understandable. So, yes, I mean, I was basically told to my face by the government authorities, don't do that. I didn't listen to them. And now the government is a major supporter of community-based conservation here in Peru. And they see it as a main strategy for protected areas and regional conservation and national conservation strategies and community-based conservation strategies. So yes, I have come across periods where I've been told not to do things, but I didn't listen.
Do you think that's come from your passion for studying these animals and working within this industry, or have you witnessed actually this actually does good work, so that's why I want to pursue it? That's why I don't particularly want to listen necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, what we saw was that, you know, this was something that made sense. It really made sense. And so, yeah, we're going to continue. And, telling people that they can't live in the forest and can't live here and can't hunt this and can't do that was not a reality that I saw was going to work. But looking for sustainable solutions. Yes, you can hunt, but you have to hunt appropriate species, and you don't hunt species which will be endangered by that hunting. You hunt animals which can reproduce quickly, and the deer and the large rodents, those are more appropriate. But no, you don't hunt the primates, the monkeys. So, for example, before we implemented the community-based conservation in this one area, the monkeys, they were hunted down. After the people took on the community-based conservation, implemented good management practices, the primates are way up now. And so it's looking for those type of strategies, but to do that, you have to understand the zoology.
At first, was there almost hesitation by those communities for implementing those models and those strategies in the first place, if in the mindset of if it's not broke, don't fix it?
Yeah, I think that has to do with traditional lands of the people. So you have indigenous people there living on their traditional lands. You have all of these outsiders who are coming in, taking resources, the timber, the bushmeat, the fish. Now the people have an opportunity to have a community reserve, which means they can keep the outsiders out. But that also means that they have to manage the area in a good way, in a well-managed way that maintains healthy animals. And then they can have tourists come in who then can see these animals, and that brings extra things. And so it's that process of going through what we call an open access system, where all these people are coming in there, and then the people have the opportunity to say, no, this is an area now that we manage. This is ours. We don't have a bank account in the city. Our bank account is this forest. We don't want to destroy it. We want to be able to use it for the future. We want to take care of it. And then the other thing was, again, you had the protectionist strategy, which I mentioned. People coming in and say, okay, we want to put a park here because we feel that the biodiversity is so important. And so everybody living here now has to move out. Well, the people don't like that either, right? That really upset. And so people who came in with the protectionist strategies caused a lot of conflict. And there was fighting and deaths, which we saw here when people tried to do that. Kicking people off of their traditional lands and saying you're not allowed in anymore is basically taking their grocery shop away from them, because where the indigenous people, where's their grocery shop? They don't have one in the village. It's the rivers where they have the fish. It's the forest where they have the fruits and the animals. The gardens around them. And all of a sudden you tell people, well, you're not allowed in anymore. It's like telling people you're not allowed in the grocery shop. Well, they're not going to be very happy.
Definitely not.
And then they weren't happy, and that completely collapsed that strategy. And that's where the government here in Peru really saw that that strategy wasn't going to work, and they changed to more community-based strategy, saying, look, we have to work with the people. They can take care of things. But we have to give them the ownership to take care of things in terms of being managers, co-managers, responsible for indigenous territories, etc.
Do you think that we've spoken about the issue of climate change several times throughout this conversation, but do you think that on a wider discussion that the issue of climate change is a well-known one?
No, I think in anywhere in science, especially in the biological, environmental sciences, including zoology, people understand the real dangers which this world will confront, and the changes which are happening. I mean, the zoology is at least let's say field zoologists such as myself, we're out in the field. The field sites in Bolivia have seen the fires, we're seeing the flooding. People working in the Arctic have seen the melting. Everybody's seen these changes who are out there, personally. And then you read about them in the scientific literature, and you see them even greater. And this has been going on for some time now. and it's getting worse. The problem are the solutions. Can this world come up with enough solutions quickly enough? Can you reduce the carbon and the methane quickly enough, the human-produced carbon and methane? You see some advances there. For example, we use solar energy now in all our operations. Try to reduce that. So, I mean, if everybody would do more of that, for example, you, of course, start having changes. You see some changes happening. You see governments taking it more seriously on the most part. Will it happen fast enough? I don't know. So I think we're entering, I think what this pandemic has really shown us is this world can change out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the climate change is, after this pandemic, it's coming. It's already here. But it's just become more noticeable, more intense, more problems. And so I think, the humans have to get this world a little bit more under control.
Mm-hmm. Do you hold much faith for those people?
And publications. After this pandemic, you change the way you look at things, because you never thought that something so drastic would happen so quickly. And so, I don't know. The pandemics are going to cause a lot of hardship, which people are going to have to revert and say, no, I can't conserve anymore. I have to get money. I have to have a livelihood. Or the pandemic's going to be, okay, look, this is the only world we have, and it's really vulnerable. We have to take better care of it. I don't know which way it's going to go. And it's probably going to be a mixture, like most things are.
Mm-hmm.
Some positives, some negatives, but I think the world's at a crossroads. Being an optimist, I would hope people would wake up a little bit, and economies will want to become greener faster than they were prior to the pandemic. But the reality is always there. Jobs, economies, livelihoods. Well, often those aren't going to be very green.
What are the next steps for you? Are you still, regardless of the pandemic, still going to carry out this research? How long are you in Peru for? Are you going to come back anytime soon? What's your next steps? I think maybe that would be an easier question.
Yeah, because we're invested in these field courses out here, we're going to hang on until we can't hang on anymore. Try to continue things until we can't continue them anymore. I have to be optimistic there and positive, and things will work out, and we'll get better, and we'll be able to get things rolling again in the future. So my plans are to continue to maintain the operations, conservation, and field research courses, and the zoology out here. I hope by March that things will improve, not only here but everywhere, and that the students who want to come back here, because we get emails from students, oh, when can I come? We don't have a date.
Yeah.
There's no air you can take right now. There's no way you can come here right now.
To be honest, listening to Richard's story, it's clear that we're already in trouble. I'm pretty sure this idea has been quoted many times across the years, but the words should bring a sobering reminder to us all. If insects were to disappear from the Earth, within 50 years all life on Earth would end. If human beings were to disappear from the Earth, within 50 years all forms of life would flourish.